Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 2018 Harmony webinar series. My name is Gina Thorne, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Harmony Foundation. My apologies for getting started a little late. We had a couple technical difficulties. Today's presentation is going to be facilitated by Karen Dremel on Strolling Down Memory Lane, Systematic Constellation Work in Trauma-Informed Addiction Treatment. For those of you that are new to Harmony Foundation, we're nestled on a 43-acre campus in the Rocky Mountains just outside of Estes Park, Colorado. Our Colorado residential rehab offers a comprehensive treatment program for adults and their family members. Who is Harmony Foundation? We believe that long-term recovery from alcohol and other drugs is possible. How do we do this? As a place between two worlds, our location in the Rockies provides a safe and quiet respite from the pain of addiction. With 49 years of treating addiction, we have fostered a generation of long-term recovery who supports our clients and families for a lifetime. Harmony staff at all levels of the organization works together to create a community of recovery support that is long-lasting. We are located at the base of Rocky Mountain National Park in Estes Park, Colorado. We offer evidence-based 12-step programming that is gender responsive. If you or someone you know needs access to treatment at Harmony, we invite you to visit us at harmonyfoundationinc.com, or you can contact one of our admissions specialists at 866-686-7867. As we move through the presentation today, just a few housekeeping things to keep in mind. You will be receiving an email from me within an hour after the webinar. We ask that you please complete that survey online. You must remain actively engaged for 45 minutes in order to receive a certificate. The system that we use actually tracks how long people are engaged in the program, so anything less than 45 minutes would not qualify for a certificate for CEUs through NADAC. We can provide a certificate of completion or attendance, I should say, if you have to jump off early. We also provide a recorded version of the webinar at the end, and if you're interested in receiving that, you can reach out to us as well. You will receive a certificate by email by Friday. If you don't receive that email, you can always contact us and specifically reach out to Christy Weeks at cweeks@harmonyfoundationinc.com. I'd like to take a moment and introduce you to our speaker, Karen Dremel. Karen is a humanist chaplain, a German native, and resides in Boulder, Colorado. She's a registered psychotherapist in Colorado, a federally licensed neuropath and integrative healing practitioner in Germany, an ancestral research counselor, and internationally known systemic constellation facilitator and supervisor. She has 28 years of clinical and teaching experience in systematic traumatology, exploration and mending broken connections in various systemic contexts, family, lineage, work, community, etc. Gradually allows her clients to find, create, and assert their belonging in the web of life. Karen's training includes somatic psychotherapy, Rolfing, Rolf movement, somatic experiencing, social trauma, mindfulness-based therapies, spiritual direction, systemic constellation work, traditional Chinese medicine, Hakomi, and sensory motor therapy. She's endorsed as a humanist chaplain by the American Humanist Association and offers herself in service of those who seek to engage in transcendental, human-to-human contemplative practice. Time permitting, Karen engages personal, transgenerational, and collective trauma in her multimedia art. I'd like to go ahead and turn this presentation over to Karen. I believe we're going to be answering questions at the end. There is a chat box on the right-hand side. Feel free to enter questions, and then towards the end we will be willing to answer and entertain any questions that you might have. So at this point, I'm turning it over to Karen.
I imagine you can hear me. And
we can hear you fine, yep.
And there is still a little thing on my screen that says you have been made the presenter, and I am not sure if my screen is actually visible, and if so, let me just get out of here for a moment and say this, yes. And then
there we go, we can see it now, Karen.
Bear with me, please bear with me. Here we are, yay.
There we go.
Thank you. Hello, this is Karen Dremel, and I'm a bit stunned about the long list of things you've just been read to. It is great to talk to you out there and to everyone who is listening, who is interested in systems-oriented addiction understanding and addiction treatment. Before I start, I really want to acknowledge Gina and Stephen. Gina helped with the technicalities, and you can see that I'm not so great at that, or you already experienced that. And Stephen came to one of my community meetings, and he was moved to connect me with Gina, who then created this opportunity together with you in a webinar. So thank you both, Gina and Stephen, for making this happen. I'll start with a sort of an elevator summary of the webinar and by telling you what I want you to take away, which is that addiction is rooted in trauma, and that trauma is a systemic problem, a problem that gets passed on transgenerational through the legacies of trauma, through cultural mores, and through the colliding collective experiences that comes out of all of that. And I am speaking of unhealed or unaddressed trauma. The second thing that I want to impress on you is that systemic constellations are a tool that gives us a chance to untangle blind loyalties and develop a compassionate presence in the process with that which is still stuck for ourselves, for those around us, and for those in the past who have failed us. I want to begin by inviting you into a roughly 5-minute visualization of a systemic constellation that actually happened, but that I sort of rewrote, if you will, for you to be in it. So, just lean back and imagine you signed up for a systemic constellation workshop. You have arrived. There are strangers milling about, and you write a name tag. While you are orienting in the room and you're seeing a circle of chairs. Slowly people gravitate to the chairs and you join them. And now you sit in a circle with a facilitator across from you, and beside her is an empty chair. She introduces what's going to happen, and she invites the first person to join her in that empty chair. You might think, hell no, I don't know what's going to happen here, and you stay silent. And you watch Brian rising and settling nervously beside her. He's asked of his issue and reports that it is persistent drug use, out of control ever since his lover died in his arms about 6 months ago. The facilitator inquires about his family history, and he seems to know little. But then you hear of pervasive alcohol use, long bouts of depression in his mother's family, and a stoic doggedness to get through it all. This seems to be a clue, you think, because he is invited to set up his maternal lineage by choosing 3 women, his mother, his grandmother, and his great-grandmother, to stand one behind the other in a line. He is asked to stand in front of them and look at them. They are asked to notice differences as they stand. You can see the shifts happen. Mother and grandmother look to the floor. Great-grandmother stiffens in terror. And while he watches, Brian suddenly remembers and shares what he calls something never spoken, His great-grandmother went missing in the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and never came back. His stoic German ancestors managed, through silence and by forgetting her name. The grandmother's representative looks up as he speaks. She had looked to the floor. She moved a few paces away to see her mother, and Brian's own mother touches him from behind. After a moment, he whispers, "Granny?" And they lock eyes. He slowly walks up to her and uncontrollably wails as he ends up in her arms. The other two women walk up and touch the two. You see tears on many faces as witnesses get up, gather in a circle around them, and hold hands. And you join them. The facilitator asks how this moment might be honored. And without missing a beat, Brian begins to collect flowers and candles, some figurines and a stone that are somewhere in the room. And he lays them down on the floor in front of Granny, who has meanwhile been seated. A smile softens her face as she watches. The group shifts again. All are now standing in a half circle in front of Granny. And the facilitator offers simple sentences of connection to anyone in the group who feels moved to speak. Granny, I'm grateful we finally found you. Granny, I'm Brian, your grandson. Granny, I now see you. You have a place in my heart. And you mutter the last sentence under your breath, Granny, please bless me. Silence gradually settles again, and Brian's closing words that he is offered are, you died. I live a little longer. I carry you in my heart until I too will die. You can see in his face how he visibly agrees with this reality, and some relief shows up that he no longer needs to carry the frozen family memory in loyalty. He can know and relate to his granny now, and he can invite her into his life as a resource. For the family album, he shyly smiles, and you know he's only half joking, as he carefully takes pictures of his granny, his mother's, and the makeshift altar. In this image, you can already see that it's not about systemic constellation work. This is because we are not doing astrology. And also because we challenge that we're born alone, that we live alone, and that we die alone. In fact, we offer that humans can mend back into connection that has been broken through trauma. And when you quickly take a look at Orson Welles' life, early life, you can see that these are words of broken connection. His mother died when he was 9, his father 6 years later from alcohol complications, and he was barely 16 when he alone travels to Ireland for weeks. Alcohol in my practice shows up when I work alcohol, and I'm saying alcohol because of this image. Alcohol and substance in my practice show up when I work with people and elicit these family histories. And it turns out that substances are used to maintain a relative balance in the family, and that those who are using them perceive them as a resource. Alas, those who are living with them and relating with them experience the horrible, often horrible effects of living with an addicted person. In 1990, the evil alcoholism gene was found because it was clear that it can't be the system. There must be a flaw in the wiring somewhere. And this model, this disease model, was very swiftly adopted. Addiction was hardwired, and it was such that very, very soon the genetic engineering could take away the bottle from those people who, like a relay baton, handed that bottle from one generation to the next. Genetic engineering could simply edit it out. Again, it can't be the system, there must be a flaw in the writing, was what for a long time was believed until, and this is why we need to mention every time the ACE studies when we talk about addiction, until the ACE studies in 95 to 97 unveiled the systemic entanglements which negatively affect thriving human health and long-term human health. Addictive behavior figures prominently as risk factor, which then means that nurture, which means connection, protects us more from an addictive future than nature. Adverse childhood experiences break some, and others become people with colorful, intricately patterned, socially accepted, dazzling facades. I remember a client, Anne. This woman had every talent, high status, and every abundance imaginable. And she was overwhelmingly preoccupied to stay ahead of her craving for cocaine, which dwarfed all else. If you read Dr. Gabor Maté's book, The Hungry Ghosts, you will know that he is a vocal representative of such a life experience. His personal troubles, his experience as a family physician, and his work in Vancouver's drug ghetto made him understand that, and I quote, addiction is a subtle and extensive continuum which reaches from the honored workaholic at the apex of society to the impoverished and criminalized crack fiend who haunts Skid Row. Somewhere, as he says so courageously, on this continuum. And he is, like many, vulnerable at times of stress and crisis, to be painfully activated by unresolved trauma and to go off his own, very own deep end. So we must be willing to acknowledge the harm that early trauma engenders and that it exists. Otherwise, the rubber of cultural practice and tacit agreements, how we raise our children, hits the asphalt of addiction lane. by scrutinizing personal, familial, and institutional practices, how we raise our children, we can see that unsafe conditions, limited attunement, lack of caring, of holding, and of protecting show to foster at best that we become these cool, self-sufficient people, and at worst, live chaotic lives, which interfere with the relations that we have with ourselves, with others, and even with the planet which sustains us. John was a client who grew up in an intentional community. So you see on the slide that I added absence, ideological absence. This man grew up in an intentional community where kids were parented, quote, by everyone. He started using cannabis at 12 and told me in his mid-40s, the adults pretty much trusted us to manage on our own. Only Mary Jane, and this is the Urban Dictionary word that you all probably know for a cannabis, never once abandoned me. He and I had met for about a year. In this time, this brilliant mind and gentle soul, trapped in such a tragically dysregulated body, was able to complete for the first time an educational program. And soon after he had shown me the diploma, I found a message on my answering machine which informed me that he had begun using crack. He never called back. When those we must trust, are not trustworthy, those early scars become lifelong preoccupations, a loss of and also compulsion. Michael Haney is the editor of Esquire magazine, and he covered the Springsteen on Broadway show, which just recently opened. He observed, quote, yes, it is about his struggle to find his true self, his identity. But most of all, it is about his father and about Springsteen's search to find peace with the man who created him, but in many ways almost destroyed him. This month, Bruce Springsteen will turn 69. His search for himself is still fused with his career, his arms still stretched to finally receive his father's embrace. Shattered connections are painful, and so we try to escape them. And those who escape those connections never know that the world even can be trusted. The nature of trauma is described as, quote, broken connection to self, other, and the world at large. That is psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton. Or traumatic events destroy the victim's fundamental assumptions about the safety of the world, the positive value of the self, and the meaningful order of creation. That is Judith Herman in her landmark book, Trauma and Recovery. And then there's Martha Weinstock and her team who say it has become increasingly clear that the development and later behavior of an immature organism is not only determined by genetic factors and the postnatal environment, but also by the maternal environment during pregnancy. Gabor Maté pulls this together and applies this to addiction and concludes, stresses during pregnancy can already begin to program a predisposition to addiction in the developing human being. So the creation of this experience, this chronic experience of imminent annihilation, makes him suggest that connection is the antidote to addiction. If we dare connection, and I see this in Constellation, and have others help us stay connected, the lure of substances may, just may, let up. Here you see the impact that we're looking for when people are missing. And here, pardon me, and here you see the impacts where people are untrusted and cannot be trusted. And this shattered trust then leads to existential fear and erosive chronic stress in our bodies and in our psyche. Visibly mangled addicts are stuck in this gravitational field of substance, where the substance and behavior rules supreme. Whichever severity one chooses to avoid this tangled, inner, painful mess, addicts fundamentally shoot for the absence of the craving. Some are socially accepted and some haunted on Skid Row, and every person in between with addictive tendencies or actuality lives out these varying degrees of being unreliable, dishonest, or emotional withdrawn. When stress and crisis hit, or reliability and honesty and presence is asked for, colorful constructed facades just break, and this bleak, gnarly, and tangled pain body appears. All bets are off, and the addict's brain and body succumb to this engraved way of acting out, withdrawing, or collapsing. Access to resilient flow and adequate responses is precluded by the system which locks into high gear on the accelerator and simultaneously slams the brakes. Arousal, constriction, and dissociation ricochet inside and eventually also outside. They cycle in predictable patterns or simply shut down. Numbness, frozenness, muteness. As a result, the depression, the anxiety, the rage, the numbness, all of those things that an out of control nervous system creates, in turn, create distance, heartbreak, disconnection, more broken connection, and eventually more illness. In my practice, and I believe if you look at it in this way, addict narratives reflect disruptive heirloom behaviors. Sometimes I hear of hazing-like rituals to belong. And alas, there are many stories of loss and suffering passed on as if they were medals of honor. These and values that are imbued in a lineage become signposts for how we parent and how we are living relationships. Alas, this means cycles of family trauma and, as an effect of some substance abuse, continue for the descendants. Providers like you, or maybe anybody, and certainly we and our clients, need to develop sociological imagination. That is the knowledge that individual troubles are nested in and entangled with issues beyond the individual. C. Mills Wright is a lucid, or I have to say was, a lucid philosopher and sociologist who coined this term, sociological imagination, in 1959. He writes, every individual lives from one generation to the next in some society, lives out a biography, and lives it out within some historical sequence. And this is brilliant because in one sentence, he nests these various layers in which we exist and ultimately in which we also operate in the world. I truly believe William Faulkner meant to say just that. When he famously wrote, "The past is never dead, it's not even past." Engaging ourselves with our clients in such processes of remembering and therefore reconnecting those fragmented past pieces and get to meet unresolved, ghostly parts of our past invites our joined gaze. And we can share compassion when we look upon this tapestry of a client's life and origins, because the systemic looking glass allows us to see the limited nourishment, protection, and failed presence that our parents and their parents even experienced. How then, if this is all true and the question pops up, where do these roots of trauma fragmentation reach? And if they reach indeed wide and deep into generations and into the society, how can we possibly engage such legacies that are mostly buried in the past and braided into the deep structures of the culture and the societies we live in? This is where systemic constellation processing enters the conversation. And maybe you already have a hunch from this story that I told in the beginning, but if a client's narrative reflected this image of destitution, I would ask, what happened to your parents? What happened to your grandparents? Or what happened to anyone else you know of in your lineage? And then I might gradually, and it is important that I say gradually, ask if the family history harbors one of the following, among maybe others. And please brace yourself, because it is a list of things for which we need to ask gradually. The death of a mother or a father, miscarriages, stillbirths, abortions, war experiences, living with a returning soldier, violence, suicide, murder, addiction, genocide, slavery, famine, betrayal, exclusion, annihilation of a family member, secrets, loss of wealth, or wealth acquired through exploitational means. This is a long list of very terrible things. Unfortunately, not everybody has them in their past. But if any or a number of those are in one's past, this phenomenon of loyalty, which is the one tenet that I want to speak a little more about. There are several in systemic constellation work, but the time is not enough to speak of many. But I do want to speak about loyalty. These are the things that descendants tend to be loyal to. This book was written by J.D. Vance, and it was a bestseller in 2017. He was 31 years old, and J.D. Vance invites us with unflinching honesty into his family saga and cultural lament. His grandparents were dirt poor in post-war Appalachia, moved to Milwaukee, worked hard, and raised a middle-class family. J.D., the Harvard Law School graduate grandson, what a string of words, looks to embody the American dream. Meanwhile, the lives of his relatives remain crowded with demons of the Scots-Irish past. They haunt his aunts, uncles, sister, and most of all, his heroin-addicted mother. The family at large never shed the legacies of abuse, alcoholism, poverty, and trauma. What's more, J.D. himself has demons that he, despite all of his education, cannot escape. He writes, I continue to struggle with conflict. Conflict and family breakdown seem like the destiny I cannot possibly escape. Breakback love is then what we do to stay connected with our ancestors. And we know this through the work of Hungarian-American psychiatrist Ivan Bajor-Minagi, who called this glue relational ethics. Vance's memoir reflects in many ways how trauma-informed, and I emphasize this again, how trauma-informed relational ethics in a collective hold families and their members hostage for generations. A constellation tends to make this visible and give us access, as you noticed earlier on, to renegotiate the status quo. Vance somewhere tells us, you will not understand me unless, and then he, says, unless we understand this and that and the other thing. And he effectively tells us that he needs us to really get just how fiercely he identifies with his parents, grandparents, and the Scots-Irish collective at large, how loyal he has to be to even the poverty that some of them experience, and the bad traits he calls family tradition. Alas, loyalty to to denied dignity, to internalized racism, intergenerational suffering, and to emulating. Sorry, my English is the second language, so sometimes this slips in the service of belonging, precludes us from healing into our own lives and from partaking in the larger web of life. These general traumas create implicit somatic narratives that express themselves in our bodies, in our ways of how we are in the world. In all ethnic collectives, be it Korean, Native American, African American, Jewish, Cuban, Romanian, Mexican, Italian, Russian, and I tell you all of these because I work in those contexts. Wherever else ancestors came from, they have an intrinsic memory of their collective socio-historical narrative. And representatives, it turns out, can feel that in their bodies as they stand in the place of someone or something in a client's system. When they listen with contemplative mindfulness to their inner experience and sensation, almost always it differs from what it was before, and we have a narrative emerging with which we can work, as you have seen in Epilogue to an Earthquake. Engaging various modes of systemic constellation is what I want to show with this image. We can work with individuals in our practice or online. We can work with groups or with community. And always it offers this connection as antidote to addiction possibility. On this slide, you see in the center what a family constellation moment looks like on a photo. And this one is facilitated by Peter Faust, a very dear colleague and senior facilitator in Boston. I don't have slides from my workshops. And the other slides, you see constellations as I do them in individual practice. On the right, you see a paper cup constellation I have developed for this method, for this need, and to do a family system. On the other, you see a constellation of little people, which I use in the integration of the fragment itself. There are parts of little sculptures I made and of stuffed animals I use, but this in itself is a whole webinar I could do. There are online resources we can use, as in process diagrams, where we can sort of see how the situations shift, or I use a whiteboard behind the camera behind me, so I can show drawings on the camera. Drinking in Ireland, says John Waters, an self-proclaimed Irish thinker, talker, and writer. Drinking in Ireland is not simply a convivial pastime. It is a ritualistic alternative to real life, a spiritual placebo, a fumble for eternity, a longing for heaven, a thirst for return to the embrace of the Almighty. At this point, I'm showing you this list with lots and lots of scribbles, so don't panic. This is a copy I will be very happy to send you as a PDF, because on here you can see, as most addicts have more than one addiction, the primary substance or behavior, often in systemic constellation work or in a systemic approach, as it were, hints at or is a clue to an unresolved trauma. My teacher and mentor and very long time colleague, Dr. Angwin St. Just, worked with trauma from a systemic and socially inspired perspective for the last 50 years. And this list, she was grateful to share with me and allowed me to share it with you. And it's very, very, very dense. It is sort of the essence of a whole teaching class that she does on addiction. And I'm happy to send it to you, as I said, but it is in and of itself a whole, well, it might be even a whole webinar. So contact me if you want this. And someone once told me it is better to write a summary than to write an announcement of what you're going to do. A little bit like it is better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. So since I never really know where I'm going, I do have a summary. We went through the epilogue to an earthquake. I hope to have given you an overview of systemic trauma-informed assessment, how we assess biosocial historical trauma narratives. I hope I followed by the core function and made that clear to you that loyalty in a systemic constellation processing is really the core function that we need to address first. And then we ask, what is the addict using and why does it matter? And so that drugs of choice can be understood as clues. Here's my contact. You can reach me through email or through my phone number. And I thank you very, very, very much to be with me. Please do contact me with questions about more of the nuts and bolts that you might have want to know about, or to give me feedback. And you might have noticed this is my first webinar, so please do give me feedback. And PDFs and paper that I've written on this can be received upon request from me through the phone number or the website. And now I'm going to go back to this little overview, and I'm going to ask to change over to questions and answers.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much. For those of you that are still interested and have any questions for Karen, I'll give you a few minutes to just write some information in and let us know what kind of questions you have. If you don't have any questions, but you'd like to reach out to her, specifically, she did provide her contact information. Karen, I don't know if you want to go back to that contact page just in case people want to get that information documented. Also, if you want a copy of her slide presentation, you can reach out to her directly and she'll provide it to you. We do record all of our webinars, and so happy to provide an audio recording to those that are interested in checking in on it later. For those folks that are interested, our next webinar will be on Wednesday, January 23rd. Dominique Condeveau from PACS Counseling is going to be presenting on TBI and addiction. We want to just remind folks that if you have stayed on for the full 45 minutes, you will receive a certificate with a one contact hour approval from NADAC. And so it doesn't look like we have anybody coming out with any questions at this time, Karen. Oh, wait, I have one person asking a question. James Hart has asked, I have used some constellation exercises with our young adult population in the context of discussions of how addiction plays out in a family. I wonder if you have ideas about how to wisely initiate conversations and exercises with people in very early recovery.
Yeah, so early recovery is a time where people can be triggered still by many, many, many things. And so the question is very apt. I generally personally do constellations with people a little later on. But if you have established trust, relative trust with a group, very, very simple constellations work. So only one person. So let's say one person asks a question and you say, well, let's look what a representative might experience if he stood in your place. So you remain the circle, intact, and then you ask somebody. Okay, this is key, of whom you know that they are rather stable and know what have done a constellation work before, to represent that person. And then they just get up and go in the middle, and you let them know you're a representative of this person and you've heard the question, and we all are here to witness what comes up in your experience as you stand there. And then you might see that the person wants to crouch, wants to run, goes numb, whatever it is. And then I am so certain that you have the skills to work with the representative vicariously on those responses.
Great. Thank you. Kelly King is asking if you have any books that you would suggest people read on this type of work.
Oh, Lord. I have about 3 dozen sitting behind me here. Let's see.
Maybe we can suggest Kelly maybe provide connection with you directly, and you can direct her on which books might be the best.
Anyone who wants a bit of a bibliography, and I would want to annotate it to let you know what's in it and where in this field of systemic constellation work, which is now very, very, should we say, colorful. I mean, many people have added to this, and there's a very classic way to do it, and then there are other ways to do it. There are ways like myself that is deeply trauma informed. There are other ways where people are not even aware that they are working or are not, how do I want to say that, openly working in the trauma field. So I would want to ask you to please write to me that you want this, and I'll make a small bibliography for sort of entry understanding of the complexity of the work itself, but also what might help you to learn a little more.
Wonderful. I think that's all we have at this time. So I'm going to go ahead and close out our webinar for today and for helping us. Thank you, Karen, so much for helping us complete the 2018 webinar series. We're very happy with what we've accomplished this last year, and your workshop, of course, was a much pleasant addition to our series that we offer to folks nationally. So just as a reminder for those folks that are interested, we do have our kickoff for our January 2019 webinar series on January 23rd on TBI and addiction. You should be receiving emails about that in the coming week. And again, if you have any suggestions or ideas when you receive your survey, please be sure to include any topic ideas that you think would be of interest. Again, on behalf of Harmony Foundation, thank you all for participating in the 2018 webinar series. Karen, thank you so much for your time. We all wish you a happy holiday and safe new year. Thank you.